Hey, welcome back to Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. We're going to be in a little conversation here with Kyle Roberts. Kyle is a friend and also the author of a book called Emerging Prophet, Kierkegaard and the Postmodern People of God. Theological Nerd Edition, Nerd Alert. I shouldn't pick on people that study, old dead theologians. Nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly good thing. In fact, I'm going to ask Kyle Robert about that and give him a call here in just a second. I think he's calling me. Love a guy like that. Kyle, how are you? Doug Pagitt.
Hey Doug, I'm doing well.
It's great for you to call. I was just introing your book on the show. I was reaching over to call you, and there you are calling me.
Ah, awesome.
It's like you're like the voice of God. Thought I was calling out for you, and you were calling me. Well,
There we
Kyle,
are. Here I am.
Kyle, congratulations on the book Emerging Prophet, Kierkegaard and the Postmodern People of God. Now, have I said Kierkegaard the way you say it, or do you say Kierkegaard? I know
I admit I'm a little inconsistent. I know the proper Danish pronunciation is not to pronounce the hard D at the end, so it's sort of Kierkegaard.
Kierkegaard, wow.
Kierkegaard. So Kierkegaard, you say tomato, I say tomato. Yeah, well, doesn't really matter. You hear it both ways.
All right. So people who aren't familiar with even that name and wouldn't know why we would be wondering about the pronunciation of it, let alone why a theologian of your stature and quality would say, hey, this Søren Kierkegaard is actually a prophet of the story of God that would really fit well with postmodern people. Tell us a little about Kierkegaard and who he is and what he did for people who aren't familiar with him.
Yeah, quick intro. Kierkegaard lived in the first half of the 19th century, and he's often hailed as the father of existentialism. Probably his kind of most familiar connection is the father of that kind of 20th century movement that emphasized existence over essence. That is, we are sort of what we do in a sense, to put it kind of basically. But he's also connected to postmodernity in many ways, and there have been arguments in books and countless essays on whether Kierkegaard was really a postmodern and what aspects of him kind of connect to the postmodern context. I actually think what's interesting is that Kierkegaard connects maybe not as well to secular postmodernity, or there are more questions about that that can be raised, but certainly to kind of postmodern appropriations of postmodernity within Christianity, a la e.g., i.e., the emerging church, because he was a committed follower of Jesus, and was really trying to articulate and express what it meant to be a Christian in Christendom. That is, to be an authentic follower of Jesus in a context in which everyone was a Christian as a matter of course. If you're born Danish, you're Lutheran. If you're Lutheran, you're Christian. You're baptized as an infant or whatever. You never have to think about it again. You've got all this information about Christianity, but you don't know. We don't know. We're not sort of forced to struggle with what he calls becoming Christian. You're not automatically Christian. You're always becoming Christian. And so he actually refused to claim to be a Christian at many points because he didn't want to suggest that, hey, it's all finished. I'm done. I'm now a Christian. So I think that connects with the emerging church, emerging Christian kind of sense that being a Christian is a process, it's a quest. You're never really finished. You struggle with, uncertainty about final truth. You doubt as a part of faith, and so that kind of process orientation and that attempt to deconstruct Christendom. And I heard you talking about that in the last segment there. I think he has a lot to say about kind of a thoughtful reflection and criticism on the institutionalization of the church, to kind of get down to the bare bones, what he called the essentially Christian.
But, and it's kind of interesting thinking about someone like Kierkegaard in, the early 1800s and being one of those voices that people are still wrestling with, right, or still kind of engaging with. it seems particularly Americana to do something like that, right? Because this is a country where we're very attentive to like the notions of the founders, impulses of this country, both the official men who founded the country and all the women and those who are slaves and free who were sort of making this country. There's kind of an imagination. There's kind of a not a fascination with, but like perhaps a really deep appreciation with there being a sensibility in the late 1700s, early 1800s, maybe middle 1800s of what things could have been like. And is there something about that that takes someone like you, who, you know, you're a fully 21st century guy, you know,
Yeah.
why are you worrying so much about what a theologian's particular struggles were like, you know, some 200 years ago?
Yeah, you know, I think it was C.S. Lewis who said we can only understand the present situation through the grid of the past, or we can,
Hmm.
you know, we've got blinders on, we've got blind spots, and unless you step outside of your own context for a minute or 10, you don't necessarily, you're
Uh-huh.
not able to see what those blind spots are. So it's like looking through a different grid, a different historical perspective. Although, you know, in many ways, some of the same kinds of questions and concerns. And one of the things I encounter often with people when students, for example, at Bethel, when I introduce Kierkegaard, is the light bulb goes on with them very often, as it did with me, which is, wow, he was writing, you know, hundreds of years ago, and it sounds like he's writing
Sounds like he's
today.
writing today. Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
but
Huh?
yet he has a different angle on things coming from a more, you know, the state church context. But some would say, look, we're sort of at the twilight or the brittle end of Christendom here. We're trying to figure out what that's going to look like going forward, and so maybe he's got a lot to say to that. And just on a personal note, I, when I was a student at Wheaton, I really had, as many Christian college kids do, you know, a struggle with reflecting on my faith and why do I believe all this, and is
Yeah,
it
right.
just because my parents did and I grew up in this country, and you know. So just a personal note, it was reading Kierkegaard that and his articulation of this faith that can live with doubt, and that can, you know, the answer to our questions is not necessarily to you know hunker down in the bunker of apologetics or something
Mm-hmm.
and get more, you know, intellectually satisfying answers to these questions. But maybe it's the realization that finitude is a part of being a Christian. So
And that strikes some people as provocative, doesn't it? Like there's people who they're not totally comfortable with those with the assumption that there's a finitude to um, to faithfulness now that we can be okay to let go of.
yeah, I mean, once you sort of crack open the door to, hey, maybe we don't have this kind of
Mm.
absolute apodictic, as the philosophers say, certitude about reality or a
Apodictic
God's eye
certitude.
view. You know,
I told people it was the nerd alert, the apodictic certitude.
yeah, that's
I
right.
love it.
Well, hey, you called a theologian in, so I
That's
got to do
right. Yeah, let's class this place up a little bit.
it. So, by the way, you're a theologian too, Doug, and I interact with your work in my chapter on atonement.
Yeah.
With Kierkegaard. So you're a nerd too, is what
Yeah,
I'm
I
trying
know
to
it. I
say.
know, but there's levels of nerddom.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I'm just a hack nerd. Hey, you structure the book, Kyle, and it's interesting. You structured it around these four things of being against and these four things of reclaiming. So the introduction is against idolatry, and then chapter 1 is reclaiming revelation, and then against certainty, reclaiming imagination, against moralism, reclaiming love, against Christendom, and then the conclusion, reclaiming the restlessness of faith. Talk a little bit about what you were thinking of in that kind of structure, because that's not an accident. Obviously, you did that on purpose. What are you doing by structuring it in this sort of for this and having to be against this? And what do you mean by reclaiming and against this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it gives me a good opportunity to give a little shout out to my
Mm-hmm.
would have been co-author Myron Penner. We were essentially conceiving the project together, and we kind of went through a process of do we have a reclaiming revelation and against whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
it would have been in that chapter. I forget what we were going to work with there, but do we have a reclaiming and against, or and we just thought, well, let's set it up in a kind of dialectical way, which was, you think of Hegel and dialectics, and Kierkegaard had a lot of interaction with Hegel when you read his works, and there were some dialectical elements to Kierkegaard. So it's sort of this kind of going from one side of the room to the other side of the room, and we're not Kierkegaard is not suggesting we're against everything,
right?
So it's a kind of a let's work our way through the maze here and see what are the rocks on both sides, as we try to struggle our way, kind of quest our way through what it would look like to do essential Christianity. So I don't know if that helps.
And you had a potential co-author, but not a.
Yeah, in the forward, or acknowledgments, or I point out Myron Pinner, who was working in academics at the time, a Kierkegaard student as well, and we connected, and we're going to write the book together.
Mm-hmm.
And a series of life events and other projects kind of led him to go a different way. So we ended up falling in my hands solely. But I just kind of wanted to point out that originally we were working on that structure together, and so he has a lot to be thanked for there.
Well, I can imagine certain people from certain religious traditions who would read this and think, chapter 2 is against certainty. You put that in the thing we should be against, not in the category of things that we should be reclaiming. That feels different than the way a lot of people think about their religion. Like they feel like, I think, cultural commentary here, that a lot of people feel like we live in such an uncertain world. We live in a world that's changing so rapidly, and there's not as the institutions and traditions of our past we don't have to hold on to anymore. We want our faith to be that unshakable thing. We want our faith to be the thing that we can rely on in a crazy world where everything is changing. And then some guy like you comes along and says, well, hey, maybe there's a way to think about this where certainty doesn't fulfill the promises that we think it might be making.
Yeah, no, I think you've really kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of there's so much fluidity and so much change and so much plurality and so much to deal with psychologically and emotionally, that I think it is true. Many people really want their faith, their religion, to be the bedrock, to be the one place where they don't have to wrestle with pluralism and plurality and difference and otherness and questions, and I see it in some of my students, and I've had some really frank conversations about. Some of them are really scared, really scared of the world out there, and of if we take away the bedrock certitude of Christianity, then what do they have left? And I think it's a little bit like, I don't know, I guess I think of Jesus calling the disciples and cast down your nets and leave the world you thought that was so secure and certain and predictable, and come follow me. And so there's I think a sense in which we're called in our faith to let go of rationalist certainty, and to follow Jesus in a pattern of conviction and confidence. So I don't want to say that following Jesus means we have no confidence, that we have no conviction, that we have no passion. But for Kierkegaard, the passion comes from the fact that we have to have faith.
Yeah, so someone like you, and maybe Kierkegaard as well, wouldn't see there being like a continuum which has passion, and then a little more passion is certainty or is confidence, and then a little more confidence would just lead to certainty. You would say, no, certainty is on a different axis altogether. Like you can have a lot of confidence without ever feeling like that's, dealing with some kind of philosophical notion of certainty. Did I overstate you there?
No, yeah, you can have a kind of a psychological certainty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel when Easter rolls around every year and I get really kind of fired up and passionate about the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
I can have a spiritual, psychological certainty that Jesus rose from the dead, and I do. But that's different from epistemological
Mm.
certainty, which I then take that certainty and then go out and battle with people of other faiths and other religions and say, see, I can prove to you that Jesus rose from the dead, or that Jesus was this historical human being, and et cetera, did this
Mm-hmm.
and that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for Kierkegaard, the passion that comes from the confidence, and that's why I prefer the word confidence
Mm.
to certainty. The passion is actually attached to the fact that we don't have
Mm.
epistemological certainty. We don't have these
Because if you had certainty, you wouldn't
lockdown.
need confidence, right? I mean, that would
Right,
sort of
right,
would be the point of that.
right.
That's just
Yeah,
gloating.
yeah. If you're certain, you don't need passion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They two don't really go
Oh,
together
that's
like we
interesting.
often think they do.
In your fourth chapter, Against Moralism, which you throw an ism on the end of about any word and everybody would be against it. So
Yes.
I'm guessing you're not saying against morality, but maybe you are. But against moralism, you start with the line, "What does it mean to be human?" And
Hmm.
it is shocking to me. All the interviews that I do for this show and the books that I get and the conversations I have, it feels to me, even the last show the last conversation I just had on this show, it feels like Christianity is really commonly wrestling with this question, not just what does it mean to be godly, but what does it mean to be human? Is there something that's sort of in the air, and maybe it comes out of even the period of Kierkegaard and others, but is there something happening right now that has rekindled the very question of what does it mean to be human? As a systematic theologian, as someone who's dealing with people that are studying in seminary and looking at the broad scope of things, it feels to me like that's a big question that comes up all over the place all the time.
It is, yeah. And if you Google theological anthropology, that
Mm.
anthropology understood through the grid of theology, scripture,
Mm-hmm.
tradition, philosophy, it's blowing up, and it's because, again, we're in this context in which we're trying to figure out who we are, where we're going. We've got to deal with the questions of racism and
Yeah.
racialization and sexuality and gender, and
Uh-huh.
you know who are we as human beings. And then for Kierkegaard, of course, the question is, who are we as human beings before God? So we can't answer the question of anthropology without also
Mm.
asking that theological question: before God, how do we understand ourselves? And so,
Mm.
moralism kind of took God and brought God, the transcendent, the divine, down into the immanent sphere, the sphere
Oh.
of rules and regulations,
So
and
it dehumanized the process.
right. And so,
Huh.
instead of allowing the transcendent finite dialectic, that tension to create kind of the passion
Mm.
of faith, the existence of the human being, it essentially meant that to be human is to be this particular kind of moral being
Mm-hmm.
in this particular moral society. And so we can
Mm-hmm.
kind of look at the development of humanity and human nature over the centuries and see that we're getting more moral. We're getting more, and of course, the lie
Yeah.
is given to that in the 20th century, which then creates the postmodern
Mm.
situation
Mm.
where it's modernity without the optimism, modernity without the sense that, yes, we're becoming a more moral race, so to
Yeah.
speak.
I remember like 4 years ago or something, I was trying to pull together my own vision of like my professional work. And I remember trying to come up with a title for what I do. Cause like I pastor a church, but I don't really do the pastor category. And I studied theology, in graduate school, and anthropology in just regular old college. And so I've thought about, faith through those lenses. And I remember like working up these little business cards that would say either anthropological theologist or theological anthropologist, right? Like that weird. And I think, what a total nerd, like who has those kinds of questions? But it really is an interesting way to think about it, right? Whether you're an anthropological theologist or a theological anthropologist, like which one is going to be subservient to the other, right? Which one do you grant this sort of de facto position of authority to? And I found myself being more interested in being, I think, a theological anthropologist. Boy, asking the question in our current day about what it means to be human, and have that be informed by a theological conversation, is really, it really seems to be a meaningful question. And I don't think it's only professionals like you and I that do that. I think a lot of us ask those questions. We hear Jesus and wonder, like, is there something in the Jesus life and the Jesus calling that calls us to a new kind of humanity? Is that what you meant when you said that Kierkegaard and others were existentialists? Like, your lived experience is more important than your sense of your essence? Was that the kind of thing that he would have been advocating for?
Yeah, definitely. And you're only getting a little glimpses here and there as you go. And so, there's a common Kierkegaard quote that's tweeted a lot. Life can only be lived forwards, but understood backwards. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we're in this we're thrown, as Heidegger would put it. We're kind of we're in the world and trying to figure out who we are as we go. And I think people really resonate with that. I mean, who doesn't want to know what they're supposed to be doing with their life and who they are, and what's their identity, and how do we? So the conflicts that come about in relationships and careers and jobs and our faith, all those sorts of questions, we want to, we're sort of driven often to reflect on that naturally.
So like on Facebook, do you have Kierkegaard quotes as your favorite quotes under your quotes that you like?
I think I might have a few, but they might be more silly than serious. So I should probably go back and take a look at what I have.
I've never updated my quotes, but I see that sometimes when you friend request somebody, you see their quotes, and that whole idea has really hit the popular culture in a significant way. Like, I'm a big fan of television right now, and there's some really great TV shows that are trying to contribute to this whole conversation about what does it mean to be a human being. And where does our morality fit into that, and how do we see the world through those lenses of what we think it means to be a person who's living a life worthy of our humanity, for a lot of us that means to live a life worthy of of God as well. But there's and I wonder if that isn't a place where churches have and ask you to speculate a little bit on sort of the cultural place of Christianity, and maybe Kierkegaard was saying the same thing, that maybe churches have lost a bit of their voice because they're not engaging in those questions quite as well as some of the other parts of our culture are wanting to engage in those questions.
Oh yeah, I think look at Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
you a Breaking Bad fan?
That. Yeah, I was thinking that.
That very coming up again here soon, right?
Oh, baby. I mean, I felt very disappointed in the fact that they turned a full season into 2 half seasons and made me wait for 6 months. But
yeah, right.
Programming decisions aside, I agree.
Yeah. Now, obviously, that can be a hard show to watch, and it's not for everybody. But that's a show that really takes a dark, deep look into sin. Sort of the dark side of humanity.
Yeah.
How we're all kind of wrapped up, potentially wrapped up in. And can go down the rabbit hole in a sense, and how bad can human beings be when you start from a high school science teacher and end up,
why do we break bad? I mean, that's just a great phrase, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, there's a scene in there where
where
the one drug dealer says to Mr. White, he says to him, "Mr. White, what caused you to break bad?" And that's really the question of that show, and I think that's why people get it, because we feel that, don't we? That sort of sensibility of this capacity to break.
Yeah, and it's not just Mr. White. They're all breaking bad in different ways,
right?
Differing degrees, and so there's an honesty there that I think churches would do well, and some churches do very well. You look at Reformed and neo-Reformed tradition.
Right.
They get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got that part down. It's some of the other stuff that needs to be brought in, maybe.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think there's a real, and that's where Kierkegaard, in that chapter on against moralism, I kind of try to articulate a theology of sin
Mm-hmm.
in connection to our finitude and humanity. But in moralism, sin is about what you do or what you don't do. In kind of Kierkegaardian anthropology, and I think even a biblical anthropology, sin is not so much about what you do
Yeah.
or don't do. It's
Mm-hmm.
more of a state. It's a state of existence
Mm-hmm.
before God that we're all kind of caught up in together. But then in Christ, we have that forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
that precedes, in a sense, logically precedes our situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's a matter of existentially appropriating, of accepting our acceptance, of accepting our forgiveness in Christ.
Yeah.
So sin is relational,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it binds people. I have a take on it. That would suggest that sin is best understood through the lens of something like slavery or bondage or being held back or being trapped, and then liberation or freedom or setting the captives free or the nation out of Israel is the redemption of God. And you really see that in people's lives, and you really see that, in a narrative like, to pick one of the show that we've talked about in Breaking Bad. Like it's not just that there's that kind of entrapped humanity is not just happening like before God and people can't notice it and you need someone to point it out. People who find themselves Breaking Bad or any of the other shows that play on those themes are like they're the first ones to recognize the fact that they're trapped and that they're caught up in this and that they've gone into those places where freedom is no longer their option. And man, that is some real powerful narratives. And it feels like sometimes religious people are wanting to tell people that, like, well, you think you're free, but you're actually really trapped, and don't often enough tap into the fact that people are like, no, I actually feel really trapped. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah.
I feel stuck and caught up and pulled down and pulled under. And it's not just happening in the heavenly economy. It's actually happening in my very life right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's horizontal,
right.
And
it's obvious.
Yeah. And so before God, as I mentioned for Kierkegaard, is not to the exclusion of the horizontal, the connection to each other. And it's all sort of interrelated there. Yeah.
Well, Kyle, congratulations on the book. I have two questions for you. One is who's going to hate this book? Who's going to be like, oh, that's nothing but trouble? And who do you think's going to love it? What kind of people? Because there's 7 billion people on the planet, and they're not all going to like the same things. Who do you think's going to find your book Emerging Prophet troubling? And who do you think is the audience that's gonna be bragging about it and passing it along like I'm doing?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's like teaching. You don't want everybody to love you because you're not doing something right.
Yeah.
And I suppose if I can start with the easy one first, who's going to love it? I hope and I think that emerging Christians, emergent thinkers who maybe haven't had as much interaction with Kierkegaard as they would have liked, are going to read this book and say, wow, why didn't I see the connection before? Or just didn't have it, have it laid out for them kind of in a systematic way of connecting the dots between this prophetic 19th century thinker and the challenges and questions of the day. And so what I really hope is that missional, emergent, progressive, and my target audience really is, I come from the evangelical context, and so you can probably tell that that's where my heart is in the book. Is I'm wanting to bring Kierkegaard into conversation with the sort of progressive, emergent, and even post-evangelical, wings who are saying we don't want to give up the kind of basic central orthodoxy, Christology, robust doctrine of sin. We don't want to give up on the atonement and all these things, authority of Scripture, but we want a new way forward. And I think that he helps us tremendously with that. So I think there'll be, I hope there'll be a positive reception there, and that's really the target. it's the people who are not interested in debunking or eschewing certitude. Um, they're the people who probably will not receive the book. Maybe not even read it.
Yeah,
So,
there you go.
yeah.
There you go. Well, Kyle, congratulations. It's a terrific book, Emerging Prophet Kierkegaard and the Postmodern People of God. Good for you. Congratulations. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Right on. We'll talk with you soon.
Okay.
Bye. Yeah, that's fun. That's worth picking up. 2 books today on the Doug Pagitt radio show. I told you last week that the show is going to have a little bit of a different rhythm over the summer, and that's certainly the case today. So Kierkegaard and Jesus. Doug Pagitt Radio today. Hey, friends, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with a version of the show as well. Doug Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities.